Welcome to the US Expansion Series, the podcast where you can learn about successfully expanding to and scaling your business in the US market. My name is Fleur.
My name is Flora, and in every episode, we dive into a different aspect of successful market expansion.
Flora, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. We received so many positive messages after our first episode with David Beckett. I'm very happy and excited for this second episode. How are you feeling?
I feel the same way, actually. I'm not going to lie, it was a bit nerve-wracking, but I'm very excited for what's to come, including today's episodes, because we had the pleasure to talk to Jordi Vermeer from ChannelEngine. And before we get started, is there anything we want to point out to listeners?
I think it was very fascinating to get more insights into how massive the e-commerce industry is in the US, which is something that I kind of knew, of course, but I didn't realize that the numbers were actually this high. Which also means that there is a lot of opportunity for European e-commerce companies to grow and scale their business in the US.
And I think it's great that Jordi shares his tips both on the expansion journey of ChannelEngine and also his knowledge and the do's and don'ts for expanding to the US as an e-commerce company. Well, without further ado, let's dive in. We appreciate this. And we thought you were a perfect guest because we looked at your resume and you have quite some experience previously at Sana Commerce and currently as the ChannelEngine VP Revenue North America.
Correct.
Yeah. So before we, dive in, please introduce yourself, tell us a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and also I'm honored to be here, and thank you guys for inviting me. Having had a lot of joy and pleasure to work with you guys at TABS in your office, but also the service you guys provide. So thank you for that. In the past few years, I've worked with multiple. So the main two tech companies I work with were Sana Commerce and ChannelEngine, and I grew in Sana Commerce. I grew from hiring, developing, building European tech or sales teams, and started doing that also in the United States. Sana was a little bit further established before I joined there in North America. But that experience was for me a very good foundation to take the leap and a step towards ChannelEngine, where I'm now responsible for the build. So I was the first hire basically in the region, and build it now from, I think we have around 15 people locally. I'll say the most interesting part is I am a builder and I love challenges. And if someone tells me I can do it, then I like to prove them differently. So that's I think a little bit about myself. I don't know if you want to know other things about me.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to have you today. And I think that's exactly already what you're mentioning. That's what I'm very interested in. You were hired to lead the US expansion. You mentioned that you're a builder and you rented an office in the beginning at TABS. So we saw you working very hard every day. But everyone was like, where did you start? So you were head of the US expansion, and then what?
Well, it started. I hope I'm humble enough for that, but just doing sales, like going after the market, going after partners to collaborate with, figuring out what the market needed, talking to clients, prospects, and potential colleagues to see what was needed in order to do that expansion. Of course, I had a good understanding of cultural differences and the e-commerce landscape because of my background in Sana Commerce. Yeah. But it was definitely a step towards not having built something from scratch. So that was a very fun experience.
And was there also an initial research phase where you did market research or you tested the product market fit in the US, or you went straight to the action phase?
There was a slight research phase. I think it was even done before I joined. Mm-hmm. We all know the majority, how large the US economy is, and I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but we knew that already with existing clients that we have, right? We were servicing some clients that had plans to go to US, or they were actually US based and they were planning starting to go to us in Europe. So we knew that. We saw that the biggest unique identifier we could be across our competition was that expansion or being part of the trend of globalization for these brands and retailers.
Yeah. It's not only the US, ChannelEngine is also expanding throughout the world quite rapidly. Is the expansion strategy very similar in the different countries, or were there things very specific to the US markets in the expansion strategy here?
So I think there's a few markets where we see, so ChannelEngine is a marketplace integration platform where we facilitate for brands through a single connection with ChannelEngine. We facilitate the connections with all these smaller marketplaces, sometimes also social channels and click advertise channels we'll get into later. But the big thing is some markets, we see the marketplaces grow very fast. So we've seen this all in the Netherlands, or Europe happening, right, with bol.com and then Amazon and other markets in Germany where they have Otto and Kaufland. France, they have 𝐓𝐸𝐸, 𝐶 That development we started seeing also in other markets, especially in the US, where Amazon was the leading one, but it was also the only one. And now a lot of others are coming up in the market. And we saw that also happening in places like Southeast Asia, very big marketplace, e-commerce market, and Australia, New Zealand is a place where this, and now it's about to happen in Dubai as well. I would say the only one we're not in that active or two is China, which is a very vast thing. They're further than anywhere else, so it's hard for us to compete or to be active there. Latin America, because it's such a vast thing, we have to gather resources for to be ready for the market.
Yeah, so it's also quite a natural growth where you're following the marketplaces in the countries.
Clients, because they're like, hey, I want to expand to North America or expand to Australia. Do you have anything for that? Right? With those clients, we can expand further. This is first what we did in Europe. So in Europe, it was from the Netherlands. It's like, oh, I want to sell in Germany. I want to sell in France. And then, later to Poland. And, so yeah, for that.
I'm curious. So looking back at the market expansion in general, what would you say were the main challenges for ChannelEngine, and like what have you learned, or maybe there are challenges that you're still facing?
Well, first of all, challenge for a business like ours with any business is people are afraid of North America, right? We're talking specifically about the US, I presume. So people are a little bit afraid of this market because it's so big and the legal repercussions and everything, you have to follow the rules, but it's different because the rules here, there are not many, but some rules are really actually just there to not be necessarily followed. So it's very tough to make that estimation. For setting up a business and a business entity is crucial. And again, you guys helped us perfectly with this, and that was seamless. So I would definitely say don't try to do yourself. I do that from others already, and you guys have done it also for 𝐶𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸 and a few other businesses. So I do that, and it's don't try to invent that wheel yourself. If there's a company like you guys, just not to sell you guys, but it really works. Secondary, the prioritization of product was a bit of a struggle. And I think that's for every also tech company the case, and maybe even also for brands. But the US market has a different need or a different structure, right? With us, it was the tax and how the taxes are calculated, or some pieces or some of the channels, right? That we needed to pay over Walmart, and yeah, that's a different type of channel. And we think then we can tell them how to set up their legal agreement. Of course, Walmart's going to tell you this is the agreement, take it or leave it. So there was some struggles there. Biggest one is you have to convince your management team from a strategic perspective, as opposed to here's what the client wants from a product expansion. So other things like finding the right talent, understanding how they should be compensated, especially salespeople, right? It's much more aggressive with the commission plans. You need to fit your pricing model to the market. That, of course, is a lot of testing. So that's what I did as well at the start. Typically, you price a little higher in North America because your cost is also some higher in North America, especially US. Brands presence. biggest advice there is go to events, right? I would say we have a pretty good, honest way of dealing with people. So them seeing you at every single event, being like, oh, I see you guys everywhere. You guys are amazing, but they don't really know exactly how the sales everywhere. So
Yeah.
But on the website, of course, it's tremendous. Making sure that the languages and the traffic, SEO, like all the conversions, it's a big piece. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, of course. Challenges for the market we need to face.
Is there one thing that you might have underestimated? Or a mistake you're like, I need to fix this?
I think in Europe we were growing very naturally. We didn't have to do outbound. We were just, client referrals. Everyone loved us. So that was kind of my assumption as well going into this. I knew it was going to be hard working, but now we saw like, oh damn, it's a little bit more than that. Biggest competitor in Europe where we were winning a lot. It's an American company and they're probably traded, but we were winning most of them in Europe. That was because that was our turf. And now we got to their turf, and that was some more challenges, and not having some really good local clients that work with you on the products, that work with you as a referral, was sometimes challenging.
And so you've been in New York for how many years? 4?
So that's an interesting story. I came here around April 2019. Okay. I stayed here for 2 years for 𝐶ommerce. Then I switched to ChannelEngine, and then our visa, or the E2 visa, dictates you have to go back and get a visa. And I wanted to go the official route, not have any challenges. Yeah. That might have been the biggest challenge for me personally, but also for our company, right? Because you need a lot of documents, and I know you guys help with it, but still, there's so much to go on. And then I had to wait a year to get it, and that was very challenging because I couldn't be located here. So I wasn't here for a year and a half. It did give me the opportunity to work from our headquarters for 4 or 5 months. Okay. And it was really good to connect with all the local managers and the teams and people management. That was really good for my relationship, because later you're the one that has to kick in open doors and basically be pretty aggressive about it. I need these things to fix my market. From a personal perspective, I've been in Mexico then for 7 months surfing. So honestly, I never remember it.
Might have been just worked out fine.
I wanted to take a sabbatical at some point, and this was like a work sabbatical, I would say, and I very much enjoyed it. I'm happy to be back though. So
yeah, we're very happy that you're back too. I was just wondering because I'm always curious. Well, both of us are in regards to cultural differences, and we happen to all be Dutch. But did you have, or do you still face certain, differences that you notice in regards to cultural differences? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, we can do an episode about this. In a nutshell, most obvious thing is Dutch are direct. You see this in this conversation, but we're very direct. Yeah. It's not necessarily a bad thing because Americans don't like BS, right? So you're cutting to the chase. You tell them what they're up for, and you're honest. And actually, therefore, they like doing business with our culture. It is sometimes important to make sure, from a technical perspective, specifically, to not always say no, that's not possible. But give a little bit more context to it, or say like, hey, well, that might be a challenge. Let us take a look at it. Then, of course, eventually you have to tell them that's going to be a challenge. But no, it was a very hard no for them. Other things are they're more hierarchical in the US, and they expect fast responses, and they're more financially driven. They have higher turnover. This all. It can be downsides, but it can also be opportunities. And I always explain this to my colleagues as an opportunity, right? Because think about the combination of those 4 elements can show, if you are able to show the financial, the prospect, or the ROI of your platform to the right person in the organization, it can go really, really fast. So just saw that at 𝐓𝐸𝐻𝐸, right? Decision making was faster, but also now in challenge, I see the same. It can also be turned around differently, right? So we also had signed, and then someone else came in, and they're like, "Oh no, we quit the project," but therefore it's result.
Well, and it would be great for you as like a team leader to sort of find that balance, maybe of like, you know, you have your European background, but then also you want to make the best of like here in America, I think.
No, I love finding the balance.
Right? Because you're saying it could be a bad thing, like the turnover time, or you know how they expect you to answer much faster than in comparison to like Europe.
Especially that fast response, it's something so small, but it is also tough because the colleagues in Europe, they're in a different time zone, right? So
Correct.
you
Yeah.
have to make sure they realize that the people that are going to have to be involved in those projects from Europe,
Mhm.
they need to also have some dedication of evening, or at least look at it.
Get awareness.
I'm not the biggest fan that people work 24 hours a day, so I always say like start later, right? I typically worked from 11 till 9 or something in the Netherlands when I was working from there, and that worked fine for me. So.
And do you notice, are there certain things that you actively do? Because we hear this a lot that, of course, you have the headquarters in Europe or in the Netherlands, and then the US team in the beginning is still quite small. So sometimes it's difficult to really make sure that they work together very well and that they know what the other is doing. Are you actively doing something to make sure that that relationship works well? Or?
Yeah, first of all, it was not intended, but working from there for a couple months is very powerful. So I would always advise if you're even hiring someone in the US, make sure that they get to the Netherlands or to wherever you're from for a certain period of time, not just 3 days, to also build a connection, right? It's important to build that connection that they feel okay sharing, because that's something that you'll find if you're hiring Americans. They're more hesitant to share something if you don't have that relationship with them, especially if it's your leadership.
Right.
So that's going to be always a tough thing. But if you build that relationship, they might be able to share more, and that's what we're used to, right? I mean, we hear when something is wrong, and otherwise things are right. But with it's slightly different sometimes. Further, I try to go back every quarter. I didn't do that when I was in Mexico, and I noticed it when I came back. I was like for 2 days. People are like, "Oh, you know, you're back at this," and then let's have a coffee. And it's like, it was a little bit overwhelming, so it was good to just tell myself I need to come back every quarter to make sure I align and I promote my region a little bit. And something that we did is I invited our leadership, or some people in our leadership, for some of the events. So they met the team, they shared knowledge, they could speak on those events, right? My CEO came to an event and spoke there. That was actually very beneficial for us, but also for them to understand how big this market is and how people react and whatever. So I think it's powerful.
And then I'm also very curious how you built the team in the US, because you started all by yourself. But yeah, you've just moved to a bigger office. You've hired quite a few people. Could you tell us a bit more about what were your strategic moves there?
Yeah, I started with hiring account executive, and him and me, we were just kind of like the two of us were doing this together. So that was also, we had to figure out how pricing, product, how everything works, get the project, get people from the project involved, etc. Then I hired another account executive. Partner manager, support, BDR, and then marketing. How I would suggest to do it better, or maybe in my learnings from it, is I think it's good to hire salespeople and BDR and stuff, but don't forget about the onboarding or the project people, because that was sometimes struggling. Of course, it's a chicken and egg story, because you need to have first before you're able to hire people.
Right.
So now we're like, we have these deals, but some clients walked away because they're like, yeah, you guys are not responsive enough. Luckily, we now hired a team in Toronto that to easier attract talent, that kind of stuff, because the US, that was a little bit tough. But yeah, it was definitely a learning.
And all onboarding is done in the US and then Canada, or also still dependent on the Netherlands?
So now for larger projects, or they're still, the people in Canada are still onboarding. So they're still being taught ways with the involvement of the Netherlands, but we have dedicated people who are doing the US projects. They work a little bit more US hours, but very soon I think the team in Canada is going to be independent and they're servicing the US market from that's a technical perspective.
So one advice is definitely make sure that you also have the capacity to really assist the clients before you generate the new leads.
Exactly. We did hire support, tech support, but that actually comes after reporting.
Yeah.
So but that was a learning from another experience. So that's why it's it was good to tell the story. We have 24/7 or around us, follow the sun support.
Yeah.
But eventually, and actually, it ended up being really good for the Netherlands, the Dutch clients who had issues. But yeah, it's the reporting part. And now we're really ramping it up. Actually, we hired a team of 5-6 people there. So.
And you already mentioned, I think, in the challenges that it was a bit of a challenge to find great salespeople. How did you work it out?
I would say I'm a bit of a salesperson myself, so I just started messaging people myself.
Yeah.
I think that says a lot about it. And the message was also like, do you want to, do this together with me? And that's also my mindset. So the first person I hired was Kevin, and he's been great. He came from the space, and him and me just pioneered this together. But I also had to find who was able to pioneer.
Yeah.
I think we did that well, and then you hire different kind of personalities that are either more organized or strict, hunting, or I hired some very big network, right, in partnerships. And I think that saved us a year of time of growing that ecosystem. So, yeah, I think luckily I was able to persuade or to tell my management team, okay, if we have the right people, with, of course, the salaries we did, we can scale the market better, and I'm happy we did that.
Do you think that you had to fight harder as well because the US was still in such an early stage? It was more difficult that you didn't really have anything to show for in the US locally?
Funny that you asked that. My colleague, so basically we also at the same time opened an office in Singapore and Australia. And I tried to, I think my management was approaching those 3 regions almost similarly. But it was, and it's very, I understand, right? In size, it could be the same, but I knew in e-commerce and marketplace size, but also how aggressive American businesses purchase software. From my experience, it was different. And I did it actually to prove, just to get bigger and more deals, or try to do that in order to kind of prove that the US was different. So yeah, I think that was at least my personal approach, but that's just, I think, a personal thing. Yeah.
And we'd love to get some insights as well on the e-commerce landscape. But what are the opportunities for European e-commerce companies in the US market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do it a little bit with numbers, this answer, because it's such a vast, it's a crazy market, right? So Europe has the total retail sales is 3.8 trillion, and USA is over 4 trillion. So US has a larger retail sales. E-commerce is 844 billion in Europe, where it is in US 960 billion. So again, US surpasses Europe. Year-over-year growth in Europe is 12%, right? Where it is in the US 18.3%. And now the funniest thing, in Europe, the population is 447 people, where it is in the US 333. So you can imagine the US is a consumerist market.
Yeah.
And I have to say I'm one of those as well, right? But it's just you're easier. You have a bit of a bigger salary. You can do more with it, and therefore you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna purchase this because I want a new product. So, right? So that's just something that I after these numbers, I think you can show the potential of this market.
And did you see a difference that it grew faster because of COVID in the US or in Europe? Because I imagine that more people are doing online shopping since COVID.
Yes, that's kind of like why we suddenly so fast. right? We kind of like exploded because of it. We had a model with our clients that it's somewhat revenue based, and because all of our clients were blowing up, we were blowing up as a business. So our valuation went up a lot. Therefore, raising a good amount of money was a lot easier, and we did that during exactly the right time.
The timing was perfect.
Yeah, for us, the timing I would say was perfect. That's maybe another piece of advice. I see some companies stay bootstrapped. And I've worked for Sana, which is bootstrapped, and then versus ChannelEngine, which is has investors, and it's a different mindset of running a business. Luckily, Sana had the financials in order to facilitate it. But if you don't have that, you're gonna have issues. So you have to find VCs to back you up. And we got a local, or at least a US VC as well. I think that was very beneficial for network perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then if we look at the marketplace landscape in the US, what are the current trends that you're noticing?
Yeah, and again, we can do an episode about this as well. Generally speaking, Amazon is the most desired and biggest platform, right? In the US, a typical client on marketplaces, mostly they do like 80% of their revenue in generic categories on Amazon, and another 10%, 15% Walmart, then some other marketplace that typically is for their industry. Good to understand that the GMV across the top 10 marketplaces in the US is around 500 billion. So you can see it's almost more than half the total e-commerce, right? So we're also seeing the trend of marketplace sales, and this is globally actually, but the trend of marketplace sales is relatively growing compared to the e-commerce. So your own website has the highest profits, but of course the marketplaces are a very good opportunity to capitalize because there's already a lot of sales, but they also have a lot of client bases, a lot of infrastructure to make that successful. However, the Amazon share is declining. So we're seeing it was 47%, it's now 37%. And where Amazon grew 15%, Walmart grew 21%, right? So we're seeing Walmart is catching up. I'm not saying they're going to be as big as Amazon, but we are seeing some trends. Other things that we're seeing in terms of development is that a lot of retailers are becoming on marketplaces. You've seen this already in the Netherlands, right? Where Baycom, most people don't know, that also became a marketplace. Yeah. There's a lot of them right now. Boxes just became it's very interesting. But here these boxes are 100 times bigger. Oh, and not to forget, just TikTok launched theirs. Pinterest is working on it. They said they haven't, but technically, I don't know. Meta, I'm not allowed to share, but there's a lot of developments in these social platforms. So this is going to be the market. It's
so basically
a lot of channels.
Yeah, all stores have to go to the marketplace now. You have to get a marketplace.
There's still a lot to say for retail or in-store purchases, and that remain the case for a lot of categories. But in terms of e-commerce or online sales, I think it's inevitable to use marketplaces for that, or at least for the first purchase, right? For clients is Sonos, and what we're doing with them, or what they do with us, is every new market or new country they go towards, they use the local marketplaces to get the first orders, and then they bind these clients to them, and the rest of the follow orders for the big purchases or the extra speakers are all on their own websites. Funny enough, Brooklyn, and not with us unfortunately, but here in Brooklyn or in the US, they do the same. They use marketplaces for the first purchase, and then people are hooked. And then they're gonna purchase on the website because you bind. If you have such a good brand, you can bind it to you. So it's really good for some brands to do that as a first.
Yeah. Then I'm also wondering, are there any consumer behavior differences between Europe and the US that e-commerce companies that would like to expand to the US market should be aware of?
it feels to me more like a global trend also. Of course, there's payment flexibility that we see now with Afterpay. Maybe an interesting one, and that's something we had in the Netherlands already earlier than the US, but the buyer model starts picking up. So, sustainability in products and that kind of stuff is more important. And that's an argument to pay more for something which is built from, plastic, ocean plastic or something like that. I'd say in terms of the industry also I am in or we're in, the use of multi-channel and the behavior of multiple platforms is rising. So you're using sometimes Amazon for your product search, right? But sometimes your product search or your selection starts somewhere else. For instance, 72% for Wayfair's customer service chat as a first option. That specific industry, of course, 40%, not 40%, just end. Right.
Yeah.
Similar that this was from a survey of my partners. Around 60% said that Bed Bath & Beyond is where they would first go to find their go item, but only to end up purchasing it around 45% purchasing again on Amazon. So
is it because it's cheaper on Amazon?
Personally, but also with what we know, Amazon has a great customer service.
Yeah.
You trust it. You can send it back at any time. You have your account. It's very easy. The shipping is fast. So that perspective is great. From a search perspective, if you type in, your cutlery in Amazon, you get overwhelmed by what you get, right?
True.
So we're now seeing the searches are happening in other places.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to teach brands. They're see on Amazon, they're like, yeah, but Amazon's where my revenue's at. So why would it be in the other channels? The other channels also fuel the revenue.
Right. So then if you look at all the clients that you worked with or still working with, what would you say are the main obstacles you've seen for the clients, or maybe recurring obstacles that they deal with?
I would say, especially with the market entry, maybe that's the easiest one. If we're talking to European brands, I see that they have a mental struggle with creating an entity. Yeah, that's why I do prefer them. Without this, I can't. I don't understand. They're asking about, can we do only Amazon FBA? But it's kind of like a bit of a risk if they don't set it up properly. So they sometimes don't want to take the leap, right? So that is a little bit unfortunate, because also the taxes and compliances and stuff are sometimes an issue. I don't think they realize how easy it could be. Again, with you guys or with something similar, it's not as complicated as in Europe sometimes, right? It's here a business it's very easy to let the business go bankrupt and start a new business because it's a very business environment. Whereas in the Netherlands, if a business that's tied to you personally goes bankrupt, you have a big issue, right? So that's why I think it's the secondary. It's the localization of warehouses and your logistics, figuring that part out. Some are trying to then get their own warehouse, but there's a lot of 3PLs or third-party logistics that can facilitate these services. That I typically advise or use FBA. Now the latest thing is that you can also use FBA for shipping off some of these other channels. So that could help as well.
Do you have a lot of clients that maybe get too confident and think like, oh, we don't need those services, like we'll do it ourselves? Would you then advise against that, saying like use a service like TABS? You have a lot of people that think that they can do it without.
I think it's mostly these brands are larger,
right,
and they have their legal team or their it's restriction internally, or an innovative e-commerce team wants to start doing marketplace business, and then they're tied up with their legal team. With 3 clients that either their finance team or legal team is tying them up, and therefore they can't start doing revenue. It's like they're ready on our platform, they're ready to go, and they can't because of finance or something like that. So it's tough to tackle those stakeholders, but of course, making a leap like this also involves internal stakeholders that you have to in your organization to make sure that everyone is on board with it.
I also agree that I feel like it's also really a mentality switch, because we indeed see it with a lot of clients that the US market can feel so overwhelming and a bit of a scary market because you don't want to get any product liability claims, or you read all these scary articles. But I feel like sometimes companies don't realize that they feel like it's safer to do everything from Europe, but they don't realize the risk that they potentially have with their foreign entity in the US and the potential legal and tax exposure that comes with it. So that it's much safer, much less risky to indeed start the entity, or at least do some protective filings or do your registration. So yeah, but that's also why we have a great collaboration so that we can help clients.
Again, if you want to take the leap, go for it. But there's a massive potential. I think the ROI is there.
Yeah.
But just don't try to do it half-baked, you know.
Right. So that maybe ties into our last question, is like, what are the tips or advice you would give European entrepreneurs that want to expand to the US market?
Yeah, so I have them for brands and for tech companies, because yeah, again, like I just said, the US is a big growth potential. It's a massive opportunity, but take it seriously, you know. Get the right people in place, find the right partners, go locally, like travel here, go to events, see how big it is, make a good plan to go for it, of course. Again, for brand, there's a lot of competition on Amazon, and you can also consider other channels for either less competition or to get your brand out to the market, right? And it is important to, if you go Amazon, you also find the right partner that can, of course, we can do a part because we can do listings and automations and making sure that the purchase center comes in, but not doing advertising. That's a big part of Amazon, right? Just make it happen, because there's too many partners to try to stand out. Yeah, some addition from my side is show that you're a EU brand, because Americans love European brands. And yeah, I mean, my girlfriend, funny enough, anytime we go to Europe, she wants to do all the shopping there because the clothes and everything is different than the US, and that's why they like it. So show you different. Tech companies, that might be the other way around. So make sure you show that you have American presence, that you have an office here, and you know, make sure that you have people from the US, America, working in your company because they trust it. And when you're building the regions, make sure you have someone you can actually trust. I had the pleasure that with our founder and CEO, I have a super good connection with the CFO, with all the leadership. I have a good connection, and I trust them, they trust me, and that's very important in order to do so, and to adjust according to the market. Talk briefly about it, but the conversation, you know, do some research, get advised by the right companies to make sure you do that correctly. Make sure you give you healthcare benefits like healthcare, so it's crucial, right? If you, just an example, is you pay at least $500 if you don't have healthcare. So it's a big pain here locally. Yeah, like I said in the start, it's just maybe more of a summary, but make sure you invest enough in also the overhead or marketing to grow the sales team as well as the clients and grow fast.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's very insightful. It would definitely be very valuable for companies entering the US market.
I hope so. Yeah. No, and again, like, it's not a service, but I always like helping companies take the leap. So if there is anyone who wants to have a conversation,
That was a great conversation, very informative. And you already shared so many different tips. What were the main takeaways from this conversation, you think?
But there are so many takeaways that it's hard to choose. But one thing that I notice is that a lot of entrepreneurs mention that finding the right talent and building a team in the US is one of the most challenging parts of a market expansion. And I think Jordi shares some very valuable tips on this subject. And I definitely agree with him that it is important to build that connection between the US team and the team in Europe.
But also culturally, don't say no immediately and show your face at every event possible so that clients can get to know you.
Definitely, networking is a very important part of it. So if you're an e-commerce company that wants to know more about marketplaces in the US, let us know and we will connect you to Jordi and ChannelEngine.
Well, thank you, Flora. And thanks to all the listeners. As always, please subscribe, like, and share. You can find the US Expansion series on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.